Today we're at Oxley's on the Linear Complex, and we're going to be looking at some new Zig gear that we've just launched. This includes a range of Zig Bugs and Zig and Floater Mono, which is generally used either as a hook link or as a main line. Now, ready tied flies aimed at Zig fishing have been available commercially for a few years now, but ESP's association with them goes back quite a long way, actually all the way to 2004, when a guy called Dave Drake, who's our rep that covers the southwest of the UK, he's an expert fly angler, fishes for the England fly fishing team and also a very adept fly tyer. He tied up some dedicated water boatman imitations for Terry Hearn and also Dave's brother Mark Drake, who's a very keen carp angler. Now, they were fishing on Pingewood near Reading at the time, and I'm not sure if it was Terry or Mark, but they noticed that there was serious hatches in the spring of water boatmen. Now, what water boatmen do is they rise up to the surface, they take in almost like a gulp of air, and this ends up being like a little air bubble on the belly of the water boatman, and then they dive back down again. Now, they found that the carp were absolutely gorging on these water boatmen in the spring, but they were actually quite difficult to catch. So Dave Drake came up with the idea of tying some replicas on proper carp hooks, so you have the strength of a decent hook, to imitate these water boatmen. And as I say, the rest is history. They caught a serious amount of big fish on these Zig Bugs, early versions of, but it was kept a very closely guarded secret at the time. But now they're available to all. So we're going to have a closer look with Kev Hewitt, who's here today, a bit of a Zig connoisseur, when you use them, how you use them, and how Kev fishes them. So we'll have a closer look in detail at the range. So now we're going to go into a bit more detail on Zig fishing and the new gear, the Bugs and the Mono, with Kev. But firstly, Kev, Zig fishing, when do you sort of mainly target that tactic?
To be honest, when I first started Zig fishing, it was always a summer thing when you see fish cruising round up in the upper layers with their backs out the water. But the more and more I've sort of tried Zig fishing, the more I've come to realise spring is the best time of year by far for Zig fishing. Now, don't get me wrong, you can catch fish all year round on Zigs. I've caught them in winter, spring, summer, autumn, any time of the year. Yeah. But spring seems to be the one for me where I've had some massive hits, loads of fish in springtime. So probably from late February, March and April is absolutely king for the Zigs. And I think the reason why, potentially, the water's warming up because the temperatures are getting warmer. The fish just seem to spend a lot more time in the upper layers. Now, you don't physically see them cruising around with their backs out the water or anything like that. Sometimes you don't see any fish at all, and you can put Zigs out, you know, only a couple of foot below the surface, sometimes 2 or 3 foot below the surface, and early spring is the one. And I've had numbers of big hits, you know, multiple double takes, lots of fish in spring, you know, fishing a couple of foot below the surface. One of the reasons, possibly because of the spring hatches. Yeah. You know, when
got to be the main reason, isn't it?
Exactly.
Really?
When the light sort of the daylight hours are longer, everything starts to come alive again, and you've got all the living organisms, you know, creeping up, and there's lots of things floating around in the water column, and it has to be the one. It has to be the fly hatches and everything coming through the water, which gets the fish going and searching in the upper layers for anything sort of floating around.
Yeah, and in the winter, I suppose, there's not a lot hatching, but you get those periods of high pressure, you know, cold nights, bright sunny days, a little bit like today, when they tend to get up in the upper layers because they're warmer. And
yeah,
again,
definitely. I think definitely the higher pressure, you mentioned high pressure, certainly I found whenever it's high pressure, the fish always seem to be fairly dormant in the upper layers normally. Right. They don't tend to sit low down in the water, they tend to sit further up and just be sort of milling about, and sometimes you're never going to get a bite in a million years on the bottom on bait because they're not there and they're not really feeding. But sometimes just sticking that little bug in front of his face is just making him sort of like asking the question, isn't it? They look at it, they either eat it or they don't, and at that odd occasion they just suck it in, and you've got one. You've got
Yeah.
a winter capture of a fish caught on a zig. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's happened to me a number of occasions. I've had some very, very nice fish through the winter on zigs.
You catch them at night as well on zigs, which you think would be
Yep.
more of a visual type approach, wouldn't you? But I know you've caught them on black foam at night.
Yeah, definitely. I've caught a good number of fish at night, just on a little black bug.
Yeah.
You know, I can't put my finger on it. How a fish can find a little black bug, bit of foam in the upper layers, just sort of sitting there in the middle of the night is beyond me. But I'll tell you what, they do find it. And as I said, I've caught loads of fish from doing it.
And it seems, you know, over the years, black does seem to be the colour, doesn't it? Whether it be,
Yeah.
you know, and we've purposely tailored this range to have the super buoyant black foam bodies. They've all got a different flash of colour. There's 4 in a packet. They've each got a different coloured belly. There's red, fluorescent green, and a sort of pearlescent colour which almost replicates the air bubble I mentioned earlier. But black does
Black's-
seem to be the one, doesn't it?
100%, definitely the one. If you're fishing a single zig just out there on his own,
Yeah.
it's always been black for me.
Do you think it's because it's the silhouette against the sky, maybe, or is it?
If
maybe
I'm being
mu-
totally honest with you, I don't honestly know exactly what draws a fish to eat a bit of black foam.
Yeah.
But they do, and it works. I've tried, don't get me wrong, I've caught on other colours, but black has definitely been the one since my horseshoe, Lynch Hill days, even bluebells. Just a single bit of black foam has always been the one.
Yeah.
And to be honest, if I'm zig fishing now, just casting single zigs out, I won't use anything else other than black foam,
Yeah.
just because I've got that much confidence in it. I know that it works.
Well, why change a winning formula? isn't it?
Exactly.
And I suppose a lot, like for example, the water boatman, a lot of other natural bugs do tend to be sort of dark brown, black in colour. So it's a good starting point, isn't it? And it certainly works.
Yeah, definitely. The water boatmen look superb. You know,
Yeah.
I've done some filming with them underwater and everything, and they really do look realistic. And I've caught some nice fish on them. I was testing them quite a bit last spring, and again, I had some cracking fish using them, so they definitely work.
Yeah. The Zig Bugs are tied to ESP curved shanks hooks and are available in sizes 8 and 10, barbed and barbless. There's 4 hooks in a packet, and each of the bugs has a different coloured belly. It's available in a bright green, bright red, a pearlescent colour, which is sort of designed, this was the original design to replicate the sort of iridescent air bubble on the water boatman's belly, and also a sort of fluorescent yellow. Now obviously the black foam is ultra important, but the little flash of yellow on the belly certainly doesn't do any harm. So Kev, going over to the Zig Mono now. I know you like to fish the zigs on a long hook link, depending on the depth of the water.
Yeah, you need something that's fin diameter, pretty clear in the water, so you can't see it, almost invisible.
Yeah.
And it needs to be really strong as well. And with this stuff, that's absolutely perfect for my zig fishing. You know, I've landed a lot of big carp on zigs, and that stuff never lets me down.
Yeah, it's got a very, very high knot strength for its diameter. It's semi-buoyant, so combined with the ultra buoyancy of the Zig Bugs, you know, one of the bugs can hold the hook link up in 12, 14 foot of water overnight, no problem at all. So let's have a look at your lead setup, Kev. See how you fish it.
Okay, for all my zig fishing, I always use this lead setup. I'm not a big fan of adjustable zigs.
Right.
They may have their time and a place, but I'm not a fan at all. I've always fished zigs popped up straight off the lead, basically, so that relies on a long hook length to whatever depth I'm fishing. So if I want an 8 foot zig, obviously I tie an 8 foot hook length.
Yeah.
I fish it where you're allowed on lead core leader, just simply so that I can quick change between leaders, whether I want to be fishing on the bottom or switch into a zig.
Yeah.
I use an ejector lead clip. So for most of the time when I get a take on a zig, a lot of the time I'm big fish fishing, sometimes it can be quite weedy, I want to eject the lead. So the ejector lead clip, and I cut the tail rubber down. So I've just got a little sliver on there.
Yeah.
So when the fish picks up the zig, the weight of the lead sets the hook. So I always use the bigger lead. And when it shakes its head 2 or 3 times, it pops off.
Right.
And then you're in direct contact with the fish, and you don't have a big lead just swinging around, sort of like
on a long hook link, that's a nightmare.
dragging in the weed and all that sort of stuff. So you're in direct contact. It's super strong, and I've landed some very big fish In fact, last year I actually had 2 catfish over 60 pound on zigs.
Really?
Yeah, no problem at all. So you know, you're in direct contact with, you know, real strong material. Last thing you want to do is get a bite from a big fish and lose it because your hook length's not strong enough.
Yeah.
So this stuff is spot on. One other thing I would also say is a real important part for me is the streamliner rig boom. Now this is the stiffest boom that I know of, and it's critical really, because when you're casting out that long hook length, a lot of people are worried about tangling, and the stiff boom always kicks the hook length away from the lead, so it makes it almost impossible. It's almost impossible for the hook length to come back and tangle around the lead. So as long as I feather it down, stop the lead just before it hits the water, the hook link flicks over the back, the hook bait slaps the water, and it just feathers down nicely. So it's almost impossible to tangle a zig. So that's the setup, that's what I use for all my zig fishing, and it's not going to let me down.
It's very simple, isn't it? Very simple setup, but it obviously works. So that's it really, that's the new ESP Zig Bugs combined with Kev Hewitt's expertise. If you have them in your armoury next spring, or any time of the year really, but especially in the spring when the bugs are hatching, you can't go wrong.